All right, welcome to the course. My name is John Elder from Codemy.com, and I'll be your instructor today. In this video, I want to spend just a couple of minutes sort of touching base, talking a little bit about what to expect from the course, talking about some of the tools that we're going to need, and letting you know how to get in contact with me if you have any questions along the way. But before we get started, if you like this video and want to see more like it, be sure to smash the like button below, subscribe to the channel, give me a thumbs up for the YouTube algorithm, and check out my website, Codemy.com, where I have dozens of courses with hundreds of videos that teach you to code. Use coupon code CAMP to get 65% off membership. That's all my courses, videos, and books for a one-time fee at just $27, which is insanely cheap. So right off the bat, I'm on a Windows computer. Hopefully you are too. If you're on Mac or Linux though, no big deal whatsoever. You can definitely follow along. All the tools and things that we're going to use in this course have a Mac or Linux equivalent, and there shouldn't be any real changes at all between what I'm doing here and what you'll do on your Mac or Linux. The code is going to be the exact same. There's no changes that need to be made or anything like that. It should work just fine. So speaking of the tools that we're going to need obviously Python. Now SQLite actually comes with Python, so there's nothing else to download besides Python itself. We'll also need some sort of text editor to write our code on. Now I'm going to use something called Sublime Text. If you have some other text editor that you like using, PyCharm, Visual Studio Code, anything at all, Notepad++, absolutely feel free to use that if you're comfortable using that, if you know how to use that. If you like using a particular one over another one, absolutely feel free to do that. No big deal whatsoever. We also need some sort of terminal to write our commands on. Now, Windows computers come with several terminals. There's the command prompt, there's PowerShell. Now, those aren't that great, so I'm going to download something else, something called the Git Bash terminal. It's completely free. Sublime Text is free too, as well as Python. So nothing to buy in order to watch this course. But like I said, Git Bash works great, so we're going to use that. If you're on Mac or Linux, you could just use the terminal that comes with Mac or Linux. Just go to the little search function, type in terminal, and you should be fine. You can absolutely download the Git Bash terminal on Mac or Linux if you want to follow along exactly, but it's definitely not necessary. So that's really all the tools that we're going to need in order to take this course. Like I said, not much to SQLite as far as tools and stuff, since it just comes with Python, so that's really cool. So finally, I want to talk about how to get in contact with me if you have questions. So I'm in Las Vegas, which is Pacific West Coast time in the US. So if you're on the other side of the world and it's during the day, I'm probably sleeping back in Vegas. So just sort of keep that in mind when you sort of factor in response time. But absolutely feel free to ask questions along the way if you don't understand something, if your code's not working correctly, if you just don't quite get something that I'm saying and you need some clarification, shoot me a message. That's what I'm here for. I do this full time. This is my job. So I'm either creating courses or answering questions for students. And so that's cool. You can get in contact with me on my website, Codemy.com. There's a contact form. You just click on it. It shoots straight to my email. So I'll see that as soon as as soon as my email dings and I can see it. You can also obviously post a comment below this video if you're watching this on YouTube or wherever. And that will work just fine too. So there are no stupid questions. If you want to ask a question on something else, I'm not as receptive, but absolutely anything in this course, anything in these videos you don't quite understand, or like I said, if your code isn't working, if you're getting errors or something, shoot me a message. We'll get to the bottom of it, and that's cool. All right, first things first, we need Python. So chances are you might already have Python on your computer. Even if you do, I recommend you uninstall it, reinstall it, and download it again and reinstall it. And I'll show you why in just a second. So to do that, we're going to head over to python.org. You could Google it if you want, or just type in python.org and come to downloads. And you can see right here, it says Python 3.7.3. That's the most current version right now. If that version has changed by the time you watch this video, as long as it's not version 4, anything below 4, go ahead and download whatever version it is. Perfectly fine. So I'm going to go ahead and click this button. And we want to save this anywhere. I'm just going to save it on my desktop. And it's not a very big file. In fact, it's, boom, it already downloaded. And so go ahead and click it to install this thing. And we want to run it. Oops, clicked it a couple of times there. Okay, so install Python 3.72 32-bit. Now, this is the first thing. There is a 64-bit version. The 32-bit version is actually the one that you want. It's the most common one. It works perfectly fine on 64-bit computers. We all have a 64-bit computer. So don't try and go find the 64-bit. You can download the 64-bit version from the website. I don't recommend that you do that. It's just a hassle. There's no real benefit to doing that. So this is the one we want. Now, before we click this button, this is the most important thing right here. And it is so very important. And this is why I recommend that you download this and reinstall it, even if Python is already on your computer. And that's this little checkbox right here, add Python 3.7 to path. And on a Windows computer, path means you can run Python, in this case, anywhere on your computer, right? You don't have to be in the Python directory in order to run Python. If you don't check this box, you have to be in the Python directory in order to run Python. You can't just run it from anywhere. So we want to be able to run it from anywhere, right? So go ahead and click that box. Make sure there's a little check box, the check mark is selected on there. And it's so weird that by default, this is not selected. We absolutely want this checked. And if you install Python some other time, chances are you didn't click that little box because it's not the default. You're not paying attention. Whoever reads the stuff on the installation screen, you just click next, right? So there's a good chance that you don't have Python installed on your path, and we want to make sure that it is. So go ahead and check that. Once you do that, go ahead and click install now. And I'm going to click no and cancel this thing because I've already installed Python, but you'll click OK and just wait for the installation process to complete. It'll scroll through some stuff. There'll be a little bar, status bar, and then that'll be that, and you're good to go. Now, in order to use Python, we don't have to launch Python. We don't have to start it. We don't have to do anything at all. We've added it to our path. Now we can just use it anytime we want, anywhere we want, always on our computer. So very cool. If you're on a Mac, I don't have instructions for you to install on a Mac. You can just go to YouTube and type in Python installation Mac, and you'll see a little 2-minute video that'll show you. If you don't already know yourself, chances are you already do. So we'll just leave it at that. So that's all for this video. In the next video, we'll jump in and look at installing our text editor and our command prompt terminal. Okay, so we've installed Python. Now we want to install the text editor that we're going to use throughout this course. And I am just using this. It's the Sublime Text Editor. We'll take a look at it in more detail in just a minute. But it's sort of like the standard text editor. Most coders use it. It's super easy to use. It has all the bells and whistles that you would want, and it's completely free. Now, you can actually pay. A little box will pop up every once in a while asking for a donation. So if you want to throw those guys some money, that's cool. You absolutely don't have to. You can use it forever for free. Just whenever that box pops up every few weeks or so, just click no, and that's that. So to use this thing, I'm just going to go to Google and type in Sublime Text. And the first thing that popped up is sublimetext.com, or you could just go directly there. And here's the website. All you have to do is click download for Windows. Right now it's Sublime Text 3, build 3207. If it's a different number by the time you watch this video, no big deal whatsoever. Just download the latest version. Now, I'm not going to install this because there's nothing to it. Just like in the last video with the Python, the little thing will pop up down here. You click it and just walk through the installation wizard. I don't think there's anything you actually have to do. Just click all the defaults, OK, and then install it. And after you've installed it, you can run it by going to your Windows Start menu and just typing in Sublime, and the little icon will pop up and you can click it. So that's cool. Now, the last thing we need, and the only other thing we need, is a terminal, something to run commands on. And it really doesn't matter what kind of terminal you use. If you're on Linux or Mac, they come with a terminal that's perfectly fine. You can use that. On a Mac, just go up to the little search thing at the top and type in terminal, and it'll pop up. You know, if you're on Windows, there's a command prompt or a PowerShell. You can probably use either of those. I don't like using those. I enjoy instead using the Python or using the git bash terminal. It allows us to do version control. We're not going to do any version control in this course because there's not much to it code-wise. But if you've got a big project and you want to use Git or GitHub, you need something that allows for that, and this git bash terminal does, so it's really nice, and it's absolutely free. So to use that, I'm just going to go to Google and type in git bash. That should be it. And then here's the website, git-scm.com/downloads. And so we can click download this, and I will walk you through this one because it's a little weird. So I'm just going to download this to the desktop, and it takes a little bit longer for this to download. It's only 44 megabytes. So it should download immediately, especially on a high-speed internet like I have. For some reason, it takes a bit to download. It always has. It's something about this website or something. It's on a slow server or something. And here we go, it's downloaded. So go ahead and click that and run it. And let me pull this over. And so, okay, it's just the license, click next, and you can leave all of these the defaults. Now here it's saying, what text editor would you like to use? Now this is weird because we're not going to use this in a text editor. You don't. You use it, it's a standalone thing, right? So we are going to use Sublime Text, so I'll just leave this, but you can just ignore this if you want. Just click next. And here we want to use Git and optional Unix tools from the command prompt. We're going, like I said, we're going to use the Git Bash terminal on its own, so this again doesn't really matter, but we'll leave this one clicked here at the bottom and click next. Open SSH. This is for pushing stuff up to like GitHub where you need an SSH key. We're not going to use any of this. Doesn't matter. We just click next. Same for this. Click next. And this is, well, this is a Git thing. We're not going to be using Git really in this course. So we can click next again. Same thing with this min TTY thing. Click next. Basically, we're just taking all of the defaults. Again, click next. And you get to this final thing. And then go ahead and click install. Now, I'm not going to do that because I've already installed it. So I'll just click cancel. But you can click install. Am I sure? Yes, I am. And it takes a couple of minutes to install. It has a little, status bar thing that'll scroll through and finish when it's finished. And so, yeah, that's all there is to it. So those are all the tools we need. We don't have to download anything else in order to start using this. So in the next video, we'll jump right in and start writing some code and using the database. All right, so we've got all the tools we need, all the things we have to download and install. Now we can just start using this database. So most people don't realize that SQLite 3 comes with Python. It's built in already. So there's nothing to download. There's nothing to install. It's already there. All you have to do is just sort of reference it in your code and start using it. So in order to use SQLite 3, all we have to do is import and then name it. So it's SQLite 3, right? So this is just a blank file that we've opened in Sublime. First thing we want to do is save this, and we need to save this as a Python file. So I'm going to come up here to File and Save As, and go to our C directory here, and we need to create a new directory in order to hold all the files that we're going to be creating throughout this course. So I'm just going to right click and click New Folder, and let's just name this SQLite. So then we can click on here, and we can name this anything we want. Let's name it SQLite.py. Well, no, we don't want to name it the same thing that we import here. SQLite 3. So let's just call this a database.py. And you see, as soon as we do that, things sort of change color a little bit. This becomes red. That tells us that Sublime now knows that this is a Python program, a Python file that we've created, right? So that's cool. So, all right, now we've imported SQLite 3. The next step is to create a connection. And in order to do anything, we need a connection to our database. So we need a way for this file to sort of connect and do stuff. So to do that, it's really easy. We just create a variable, and you can call it anything you want, but I'm just going to call this con, short for connection. And then we want to set this equal to SQLite3.connect, and then we want to pass in the name of the database that we want to create. Now, this will connect to whatever we call the database, and if it doesn't exist, it will create it in this directory, in this SQLite directory that we just created. So we can call this anything we want. Let's just call it customer.db. We're going to pretend we have a company, we have customers, and so we're going to create a database of those customers. So that's pretty much all we need to do. And one thing I will note, SQLite 3 allows you to create a database like we've just done, or you could also just use a database in memory. And it won't save it. You can use it in your program, but then as soon as the program ends, the database disappears. So you can do stuff to it, but it's not permanent, right? So if you want to do that, I'm just going to copy this and paste. Instead of naming the database, oops, back. Instead of naming this database, instead we just type in colon, and then memory, and then another colon, right? So this will create a connection to a database in memory. Now, we're not going to do that in this course. We want to actually save our database so that we can use it later on if we want to. But if you've just got some little thing you need to store some data at, do some stuff to, and then delete it afterwards, this memory thing will work. So that's kind of cool. I'll just comment that out. Okay, so we've got our connection. And if we save this, I'm going to hit Control S on my keyboard. Now we can run this. It won't actually do much. Well, that's not actually true. To run this, head over to your Windows Start menu and type in git bash, right? Just search for git bash, and that will open up this. And if we go pwd, we could see we're in the C users flat planet directory. Now, my computer is called Flat Planet. It's just the name of it. I don't think the world is flat. I just find it hilarious that some people do. So that's what I name my computer. Whatever your computer name is or whatever your username is, you'll likely see that there. So what we want to do first off is change directories. We want to move into that directory we just created with our Sublime text. So to do that, we use the cd command, stands for change directory, and then just type in C and then SQLite. I think that's the name of the directory we just created with Sublime. And if we type in ls, we can see our database.py file that we've just created. And that is just this file right here, right? Database.py. And there's not much going on in here just yet, but we can still run this. And to run it, as long as we're in this directory, we just type in Python and then the name of the file, which is database.py. And if we do that, it doesn't look like anything's happened. But now, if we type in ls, we see this customer.db file. It's been created. And that is just this guy right here. So the database wasn't there before, but when we ran this connection, it noticed that there wasn't a database called CustomerDB, and we're trying to connect to CustomerDB, so it just creates it for us. So that's a real quick and easy way to create a database. And that's all for this video. In the next video, we'll create a table, and then we'll start adding data to that table, and it should be fun. All right, so we've created our database. We have a connection. Now we want to build a table in order to, put data in. And if you're not really familiar with databases, a database itself doesn't really do much. It's the table inside that has all the stuff in it. All the data goes into the table. Whenever you query a database, you're querying a table. Whenever you're putting information into a database, you're putting it into a table. So it's the table that's the important thing of a database. And think of a table as an Excel spreadsheet. It's just a big thing with rows and columns, right? That's pretty much it. So if you can visualize a spreadsheet, that's what a table is. And so to create a table in SQLite 3, it's pretty simple. First, we need to create a cursor. And a cursor it's sort of like, I don't know, it's what tells the database what you want to do. So whenever you do anything, you're going to use your cursor to do it. And you'll understand more exactly what that means as we start to use this. It's really easy. We just have to build it once and then we can use it. So to create a cursor, we just create a variable, and you can call it anything you want. You could call it cursor if you wanted. I'm just going to call it C because we're going to be typing it a lot. So just C. So C equals, and we want to connect to our connection, this con, and then we want to create a cursor instance. And you don't need to know what that means. It's the cursor, right? So we do that, and let's make a comment, and I'm going to go create a cursor, right? So now we can use this cursor to do all kinds of things. And the first thing we want to do is create a table. So let's go create a table. Now, so to create a table, it's really easy. We use our cursor, C, and whenever we want to do things in the database, we're almost always executing some command. So we want to go c.execute and then pass in whatever commands we want. In this case, we're going to create a table. And there's a couple of different ways to execute commands using SQL. And the first one I'm going to show you is something called a doc string. I think this was, yeah, doc string. And it's just 6 quotation marks, right? And inside of here, you can do multiple things on multiple lines, right? That's why we want to use this doc string. And this is what the Python documentation recommends you do. Now, a lot of times when we execute a command to our database, we're just doing one thing, right? Add Bob to the database, right? So that's one line. We won't use doc strings. We'll just use regular quotation marks. But in this instance, when we're creating a whole table, there's going to be a lot of data to push up. We want to do it on multiple lines just so it's easier to read. And so we'll use these doc strings. So what we want to do is create a table. And what do we want to call our table? Well, our database is a customer database. So let's create a table of customers, plural. So the customers table is in the customer singular database. Call it anything you want, though. It doesn't really matter. And now all we have to do now is define the rows and columns that we want. So this is going to be on several lines. I'm just going to tab over here. So what do we want? Well, we want to record customers' first names, their last names, and let's say email. So we just sort of put all those things out. We type in first, and what do we want to call it? First underscore name. And then we have to decide the data type. I'll just put data type for now, and we'll talk about data types in a minute. So first name, last underscore name, data type, and email or email address. Let's just do email, and then data type. Okay. Now we can do this, and let's tab these over again. Okay, so I'll talk about data types in just a second, but let's look at this here. We're creating a table, and one thing I should note, SQLite 3 is case sensitive. So the things you type capitalized or lowercase, they matter. So this needs to be capital create table and then lowercase customers. Okay, so let's look at this whole command. If I copy this and print it again, just to give you an example without the doc strings, we could just use regular quotation marks. But you can see you got these big red angry error messages here in our Sublime text. That's because this all needs to go on one line if you use single quotation marks. And let's see. Finally, boom. So, okay, this will work, right? This is equally valid. This is valid, and this is valid. But just look at this right here. Like, it's hard to read this, right? You know, you got to scroll. You know, it's all smushed together. It's just no good. That's why I use these docstring triple quotation marks in this case. So just a quick little aside. So, all right, we're almost there. Now we need to talk about data types. And data types, if you're familiar with programming, a data type is a type of data. So like think strings, numbers, integers, booleans. Python has a bunch of other data types like lists and dictionaries and things like that. If you're familiar with data types, it's the same thing here. You have to define the type of data that's going to be in each of these fields. So in our case, first name, last name, and email, those are all text type things. So we need to define a text data type. Now, the thing about SQLite that's actually kind of cool, I actually like, is it only has 5 data types that you can choose from. Other databases, MySQL, Postgres, any other database you can think of, has dozens of data types. And it can get confusing because you only really use a couple, right? If you think about it, you're going to use text, you're going to use numbers. That's probably about it, right? So that's kind of cool that SQLite 3 only has 5. And the 5 are null. Let's see. And integer. I'll talk about these in just a sec here. Real, text, and blob. right? So null just means, does it exist or does it not exist? If it doesn't exist, it's null, right? If it does exist, it's not null, right? An integer is a number, a whole number, 1, 9, 106, 2 million, right? As opposed to real, which is a decimal, 10.5, right? 1995, that's real, right? So if you're using something as a number, just use integer. If you have decimals, use real. Text is just how it sounds, text. And finally, blob is it's stored exactly as it is. So think of like images. An image might be a blob. An MP3 file, a music file might be a blob, right? It's just a blob, right? So pretty simple. In our case, we're going to use text for all of these. So we just type in text, and text, and that's it, right? Let's go data types, right? Okay, so we're almost there. Now, there's one more step, actually 2 more steps we need to do. We've created this cursor, right? And now we've created a command for the cursor to do, but our program hasn't actually executed that cursor command yet, right? In order to do that, we need to commit this thing to the database. And if you're familiar with other databases, committing something to a database is a common theme. Here, to do it, we just commit our connection. So con.commit, right? And that's it. This will now execute this guy right here, push whatever we're trying to do into the database, and do whatever we're trying to do. Finally, the last thing we really need to do, and let's go commit our command. The last thing we need to do is close our connection. So anytime you create a connection, like we did up here, right, you want to close that connection. You don't have to. When your file stops running, it will, by default, close itself. But it's just best practice to do it explicitly. And to do that, we just type in con.close, right? Okay, so if we save this and now run it, pull up our terminal, clear the screen, and I'm just going to push up on my keyboard, and that will scroll to previous commands. And we just type in python database.py, which is the name of our file, and we hit this, boom, nothing has happened on the screen, but we didn't get any error messages, so that means that this thing executed correctly. We've now created a table called customers. Inside of that customers table, there are 3 columns, first name, last name, and email. And now we can start sending data into the database. And we'll look at how to do that in the next video. Okay, so we've got our table created. Now we want to put data into the table. So how do we do that? Well, pretty simple. We just create another cursor command, right? So c.execute. Anytime we do anything, we want to execute our C, our cursor, right? And so now we want to insert data into our table. So we use the insert into SQL command. And this is all just SQL. If you're familiar with SQL, these are just SQL commands, right? Very basic. So they're always capitalized like that. So we want to insert into customers, the name of our table, and then values, and then just type in whatever values we want. So remember, we have first name, last name, and email. So we need 3 things, right? So we want, let's go John. And we separate each of these by a comma, elder, comma, and then john@codemy.com, right? So you notice I'm using single quotes. That's because we started this string off with a double quote. So if we tried to use a double quote here, the whole thing would be wonky because it would think that we're trying to close this double quote. Instead, we just use single quotes and everything works fine. So let's see, that worked. That looks good. Now, again, we need to commit this command. So we'll just leave that there. and we need to close our connection. So let's go ahead and save this. Come back here and run this again. And again, we get no message. Now we could create a little message if we wanted to. We could just print to the screen, command executed successfully. I don't know. If we wanted to do that, we could. We definitely don't have to do that. So we've now inserted one record, one row into our database. We could do more than that. We could go Tim Smith. Let's go Tim at Codemy.com. So if we save this, come back here, run it again. Command executed successfully. That makes you feel a little better that something is on the screen, right? Whatever. Let's do one more. Let's go Mary. What's a good last name? Mary Brown? I don't know. And she's at mary@codemy.com. Save this. Run it again. Okay, so now we've got 3 records in our database. Pretty simple to sort of add one thing at a time to our database. And that's all for this video. Okay, in the last video, we inserted one value at a time. And sometimes you want to do that, but sometimes you want to sort of insert lots of things all at once. How do you do that? Well, it's a little bit more complicated, but not too much more complicated. So let's create, many customers, a variable, and we want this to be a Python list, right? So inside of here, each item, as you would with any Python item, you can go like this, right? So each of these things become an item, right? So it's sort of like a tuple inside of a list, right? And here you would just go, let's go Wes at Brown, and let's go Wes at Brown.com, right? And we can put these on multiple lines if we want. To sort of just make it easier to read, we can go, I don't know, Steph, Steph at, and finally we can go Dan pass. And Dan's email address is dan@pass.com. Right? I'm going to go ahead and put the comma there at the end of that. Okay, so now we need to do a little bit different down here in our execute. Instead of executing, we're going to execute many, right? Slightly different command there. And here, instead of typing in all the things, we want to create a tuple, and we want to put placeholders. So the placeholder in SQLite 3 is the question mark. So we go question mark, question mark, question mark. So this is sort of first name, last name, email, right? And then we put a comma, and we just pass in the name of our list here, right? Many customer. Actually, let's change this to many customers. Makes more sense, right? Okay, so what it's going to do here is it's going to execute many. Each of these is 1, 2, 3. And here's the placeholder for each one. Boom. Pretty simple. If we save this and run it again, command executed successfully. So hopefully that has worked. We don't know yet if any of these have worked because we haven't actually looked inside of our database to see what's in there, and we'll do that in the next video. Okay, so we've put a bunch of stuff into the database. Now, how do we get anything out and sort of display it, see what's in there? Well, to do that, we need to query the database. And to do that, we use our cursor, c.execute. There we go. And then inside of here, we want to select, and let's just pull out everything at this point. So star stands for everything from, and we want to pull it out from the customers table. All right. So that sort of creates the query, and to actually get the thing, we need to then go c.fetch, and you can do 3 different things. I'll just type them out. We can fetch 1, we can c.fetch many, and then pass in however many we want, or we can c.fetch all. And this will return, as you would expect, everything. This will just fetch the last item in the table. Yeah. So what we want to do is fetch all. So if we run this, nothing actually happens. We have to actually print to the screen explicitly. So we would wrap this whole thing in a print function. And then we can go ahead and comment out that. So let's save this and run it and see what we got here. And boom, we get all of this stuff. And this is returned as a Python list, right? So here we have John Elder, that was the first one, Tim Smith, Mary Brown, and then that time in the last video when we did them all at once, we had Wes, Steph, and Dan, and you can see all of them are sort of spewing up on the screen, right? So this is just all the data given at once. Obviously, you can do all kinds of stuff to pull out specific stuff to make this look more readable, pretty, useful. And I think we'll look at that in the next video. Okay, so we fetched all, right off the bat. It spewed back all this stuff. We could also, let's go ahead and comment this out. And we could just fetch 1. And if we want to print this to the screen, we wrap it all on print function. We save this and run it just real quick just to show you what this other stuff does. Boom, John Elder, john@codemy.com. You can see it looks like a tuple, however you want to say that. And you can access it just as a tuple. So you notice this is the very first thing. So it's not the last thing that fetch 1 brings you, it's the first thing, right? Likewise, you could do, let's see, fetch many. Let's comment this out, and we want to wrap this. Save this and run it. We get 3. 1, 2, and 3. It's just the first, second, and third one, right? So it's kind of interesting, but we don't want to do that. We want to work with fetch all, and now we want to do stuff, right? So, well, actually, first, before we do that, let's go back to the fetch 1. Now, this is a tuple, so we can access the stuff inside of it by referencing the item number. So first off, before we do that, let's just save this and run it again just to show you real quick. And I'm going to clear the screen. Okay, so fetch 1 brings 1 record, John Elder and john@codemy.com. So this is the 0th item in the tuple. This is the first item, and this is the second item. This is just Python tuple stuff. You're familiar with tuples or lists. When you number items in a list or a tuple, the first one is 0, the second one is 1, and the third one is 2, right? So we can access specific ones of those by referencing those numbers. And to do that, we just, like I said, slap on the brackets here, and let's just call 0 the 0th item. That should be John. So if we save this and run it, boom, we get John. So that is one way to do it, right? And you can do the same thing with fetch all, and fetch many for that matter. But that's not really what we want to look at right now. What we want to look at is fetch all. And this is a list, right? So we could set a new variable. We could create a variable called items and set it equal to this. Then we could either just print items. In fact, if we do this, it'll look the same. Save this and run it as it did earlier. It just spews out all of it, right? Or you could create a loop of some sort to loop through each thing. Let's go ahead and give that a try. So let's go for item in items, print item. Right? So if we save this and run it, just a basic for loop, boom, we have each of these printed out one line at a time. Now we're starting to get somewhere. It's starting to be a little bit more readable, right? So each of these are now a tuple, and we can do tuple-y things to them. So instead of printing out the whole item, we could use our brackets and say print out the 0th item inside each tuple. All right, so if we save this and run it, we get John, Tim, Mary, Wes, Steph, and Dan. Very cool. There are 3 columns, so we could, if we really wanted to, play around with this. We could go print this, plus we can then concatenate, and let's make a space and concatenate again, and let's go item 1, concatenate, make another space, and then concatenate again and go item 2, right? So if we save this and run it, and let's clear the screen, we get John Elder, John at Codemy.com, Tim Smith, right? So it's starting to format up a little bit, and we could play around with this. You know, we could do a little formatting like that. If we save this and run it, that's looking a little bit better. We could, I don't know, we could use tabs instead. That is \T. Is that right? Or is it /? Backslash. So this will tab everything over. So if we run this, then now things are starting to look a little bit better. This one didn't quite make it over because it did tab, but this name is so short, the tab didn't go as far. That's kind of funny. We could do 2 tabs, I suppose. Right? And here we could go outside of the loop. We could go name. Well, we need quotation marks. Name. Yeah. Plus 2 tabs. And email. Does that look right? And here we could do print and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, plus a couple of tabs, and then what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I don't know. A couple more. Boom. I don't know. Save this. I'm just playing around at this point because it's kind of fun. All right, formatting has gone a little bit wonky here because this is too short. But you get the idea, right? You can sort of play around with all this stuff. Let's get rid of one of these tabs and see how that looks. Clear the screen real quick. All right, so looking a little better. The point is you can use all the sort of Pythonic things you want, loops, things like that, to format the stuff that you fetched all in any way you want, and you use it just by calling any list item in the returned data. So a little bit much to swallow in this one, but really pretty simple when you get right down to it. All this stuff at the end, we're just playing around here. So that's how you sort of format results using Python and SQLite 3. Okay, in this video, I want to talk about primary keys. And a primary key is a database thing. If you're familiar with other databases, you're probably already aware what a primary key is. And basically, it's a unique ID number that each record in your database gets. So for instance, we've select everything from our database table customers, and we've put it into this items variable. Now we could print out items, right? If we save this and run it, oops, there we go. We see each of these items, John Elder, Tim, blah, blah, blah. We can, like we did in the last video, a couple of videos, instead we can go for item in items, print item. If we save this, it looks a little bit nicer, right? So each of these is a record. This is a record, this is a record, this is a record, right? And each record has a column, first name, a column, last name, and a column email. Well, actually, SQLite 3 creates another column sort of in the background with a specific primary key, a unique ID that is unique for each of these records. And to see what that is, it's called a row ID. And we can actually select, right up here in our select statement, we could just go row ID and everything from customers. Now, if we save this and run it, it's going to print out that ID as well. So you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, John, 2, Tim, 3, Mary. So, we could look up Mary Brown, or we could look up number 3, right? And we'll look at how to call specific things from our database in the next video. But in this video, I just wanted to really quickly touch base on that primary key because it's an important database concept. And in most databases, you have to create the primary key yourself and then create some sort of auto-incrementing mechanism so that anytime you add a new record to the database, it auto-increments a new ID. So for instance, we have 6, right? 6 is our last ID. If we added a new person in, we would need to create something that said, okay, the last one was 6, so make the next one 7, right? We don't have to do any of that with SQLite. It does it for us automatically, unless you specifically tell it not to. And I'm not even going to get into showing you how to do that because you're never not going to want to do that. You're always going to want this ID. It's a good idea to have a unique number for each record that you can reference, and we'll see why a little bit later on in the course. So I just really quickly wanted to show you that row ID. It's just sort of a unique SQLite 3 thing. It does it for you. It's very, very cool. And yeah, so that's all for this video. In the next video, we'll look at pulling out specific things from our database, like searching for specific things. And that'll be in the next video. Okay, up until now, we've just been pulling everything from the database, from the table. Now we want to look at how to pull out specific things, how to search for things, right? So you maybe don't want everybody. You might want just everybody with the last name Elder. How would you do that? Well, come up to our query here. And so we want to, let's get rid of the row ID. We don't really need that. We want to select everything from customers. And now we just use the where clause. Where, this is just basic SQL, where we could go last underscore name equals, and use single quotation marks, Elder, right? So if we save this and run it, let's clear the screen here. We get, boom, John Elder. That's cool. Now, we can also use all of our other sort of comparison operators, right? If we had numbers, we could use less than, equal to, greater than, or equal to, where, let's say, if we had an age column, we don't, but if we had an age column where age is greater than, let's say we wanted everybody over the age of 21, right? Or equal to 21, we would do that, right? So that's kind of cool. One you're going to use a lot is like. So we could go where last underscore name is like, and then use quotation marks to sort of search. And we've got a bunch of Browns, so we could go where the name is sort of like BR, and then you put this, what is that, the percentage sign? Yeah, it's sort of like a wild card where it starts with BR and ends with whatever, right? So if we save this and run it, we get Mary Brown and Wes Brown, right? So Very, very cool. We've got a bunch of codemies, right? We could play around with that where we could go where email is like, and we can start out with this percentage sign, and then we can go codemy.com. Save this. I'm not sure why that turned purple like that. But we get 3 returned results. Let's look at this more. Let's get rid of this. Yeah, it's just going to do that, it looks like. So, okay, so there were 3. Now we can test this just to make sure that was correct, right? And let's save this and just run it again. So we have 1, 2, 3, and that's all. So that was correct. So a pretty simple way to search for different things using your query, using the where clause. And like I said, you're going to use your logical operators. Those are basically, like I said, equal to, less than, greater than, less than or equal to, greater than or equal to, like, and that's pretty cool. So in the next video, we'll look at updating records, making changes once we've already put something in the database, and that'll be in the next video. Okay, in this video, we want to update records. So let's head over here. Let's just put this stuff down and let's go update records. And it's pretty simple, pretty straightforward. And we just go c.execute, right? Now, this is going to actually be kind of long, so we're going to use those doc strings again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? And what we want to do is update. And we want to update our customers table, right? Now we want to set, what do we want to set? Well, let's say we want to change the first name of John Elder to Bob Elder, right? So we want to set first name equal to Bob. And then where, and let's go last name equals Elder, right? And actually, we want to wrap these in single quotes. There we go. Boom. Boom. Come back. I cannot type. There we go. All right, so we could have put this all in one line, but easier to break it apart like that. So this will work, but it's probably not the way you want to do it. We'll talk about that in just a second. So let's go ahead and we want to commit this. So we'll go ccommit or con.commit, right? And then we want to select everything from our database and print it all onto the screen just to make sure that the change got made, right? So let's save this, head back over here and run it again. And boom, we get Bob Elder, Tim Smith, everything else is the same, and it looks like it's worked. Now, this isn't a good way to do it. I mean, it works, and this is the correct structure and everything, but you're not going to want to make a change to a record based on a last name, because we could have a bunch of elders in there. And if we did that, this would change them all. And we don't want to necessarily do that, right? So instead, we want to come down here and let's call our row ID again. Let's save this and run it. And now we see our row IDs. What you really want to do is use those row IDs for this exact thing, right? We don't want to update all the records that have a last name Elder. We just want to update record number 1. So instead, we want to do it that way. So let's go ahead and try that again. And up here, we want to set first name equal, let's change it back to John, where, and then we go row ID equals 1. All right, so if we save this and run this again, boom, now it's John Elder, right? So like down here, Brown, we want to change Mary Brown to Marty Brown, right? So she's number 3. If instead we did brown, that would throw off some problems, right? So let's try that and just see what happens. So we want to go Marty, where last underscore name equals brown, right? So if we save this and run it, boom, this one is Marty Brown and this one is Marty Brown. See? That's no good. We can't have that, right? So instead, let's change it back to Mary. And we can do that like this. Save this and run it. That gets us part of the way. Now they're both Mary Brown, but we want number 4 to be Wes Brown, right, instead of Mary. So we would come up here where row ID equals 4. Is that right? Which was Wes? Wes, yep, 4. All right, so then we want to change it to Wes. So if we save this, let's clear the screen and run this one more time. We get number 3, Mary Brown, number 4, Wes Brown, and now everything is right in the world. So important that you use ID, the row ID, the primary key, in order to update things, also to delete things. We'll look at that next. Just very important. Otherwise, you can get into all kinds of problems like we just saw, and that's no good. So that's all for this video. In the next video, we'll look at how to delete a record. Okay, in the last video, we looked at updating records. In this video, we want to look at deleting. And deleting is very similar to updating. It's pretty simple. We just come over here and go c.execute. And then inside of here, we want to delete from our customers table. And we just use our where clause, where, and then what? Well, our data is gone, but the last row was that Dan guy. He was number 6, right? And let's get rid of him. We had trouble with the formatting because his name was too small way back at the beginning of the course. So let's just get rid of him. So where we go, row ID equals 6. Now you'll notice I'm not wrapping this in quotation marks because that would make this a string. And the row ID is a number. It's an integer. So you can't use a string when it's a number. So just sort of keep that in mind. And I think that's pretty much it. So if we save this, head over here and run it again. Boom. Number 6, Dan pass is gone. So that's delete. Once you delete a thing, it's gone. Dan has been dropped from the table. When we delete things, we call it dropping from a table. So he's been dropped, he's deleted, he's gone. And that's that. He can't come back. So keep that in mind when you delete something. It's sort of permanent. So yeah, just keep that in mind. So that's all there is to delete. Pretty simple. And in the next video, we'll look at ordering. Okay, in this video, I want to look at ordering. And ordering allows us to return the results however we want. Right now, we're just returning them by default, which is just in order, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? So we could order by just about anything. And, well, we'll just go through and do some, and you'll see. So let's see. Let's change this to order by. Well, in fact, we can get rid of all of this. Instead of query the database, let's go order by. All right, so same sort of thing, right? We want to select row ID and everything from customers, and we just go order by, and then let's go row ID, right? So if we save this and run it, we're not really going to see anything different here, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Because default, that's how things go, ascending from small to high. That's ascending, or ASC, ascending, short for ascending, right? You can also do descending, DESC, short for descending, right? And descending is high to low. So we can do that just by changing this to DESC, right? So if we save this and run it, boom, now see the first one listed as 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, right? Pretty cool. You know, you could type in ASC here, but the default is ascending, so you don't have to be explicit, right? We could order by last name. Now that's going to be alphabetical from low to high, or from A to Z, right? So if we save this and run it, let's clear the screen. We get 3, 4, 1, 5, 2, but you'll notice Brown, B, so A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, elemental P, Q, R, S, and it's like that. So let's see. That was ascending. We could do the opposite, descending from Z down to A, right? So if we save this and run it, we now have the S, K, E, B, and B. And let's see. I don't know how they determine which of the Browns go first since they're both the same. I would guess it's numerically, but we're descending, so I don't know. Interesting. So that's order by, relatively simple, and yeah, not much to it. In the next video, we'll look at and or. Okay, in this video, I want to look at and or. And or allow us to sort of extend the functionality of your where clause. So, you know, let's just come right in here and let's go where. So, and or allow you to add more conditions to your where clause, basically to search for more than one thing. So let's look at our data real quick. So we've got 2 of these Browns, right? So let's search for where last underscore name is like, and then let's go BR, and then that, remember that percentage sign, and, right, and where row ID, well, actually, first, let's just run this by itself just to make sure this works, right? So here, boom, we get Mary and Wes Brown. Now, let's say we only want Mary, but we're not sure, so we have to search also. So we could go where last name is like bruh, and row ID equals 3, right? So notice we have two conditions, this condition and this condition. And both of those have to be true in order for it to return something, right? So if we save this and run it, we see, boom, just Mary Brown, number 3, right? We can also use or instead. We could go or. And in this case, it's going to return 2 different results, Mary and Wes. Why? Well, because this is a different logical type of thing. Before, we wanted and means both. Or means either or, right? Do this or do that. So this has to be true, or this has to be true. And in our case, up here, the last name has to start with BR, or the number is 3. Well, this one starts with BR. Its number is not 3, but it doesn't both have to be. Only one has to be true in order for it to return. And in this case, BR is true for this one, so it returns Wes and Mary. So pretty simple concept, but very useful. There are times when you need to search for several different things. And I've just done 2 things. 1, 2. You can do as many as you want. Just keep slapping on ors, or, you know, you get it. Or, you know, email is like something, or, you know, and you could just keep going and going and going. I don't know why you would want to, but there are certain circumstances where you might have a few things you want to search for. You could do that with or. If you need all of them to be true, use and And pretty simple. In the next video, we'll look at limit. Okay, in the last video, we looked at and and this video, I want to look at limiting. So our little database only has 5 records. So, we likely wouldn't ever want to limit the results. But in reality, you might have 1,000 records, 10,000, 100,000, 1,000,000 records, 2,000,000 records. You might only want to return a certain number of results, right? So to do that, you use limit, and it's very simple. You just type in limit and then the number, limit 2, right? So here, if we save this, we're selecting the row ID and everything from customers, limit 2. I can't imagine you would guess what the result will be for this, but it limits it to 2 results, right? So we have 1 and 2. Let's see if we can string along some. Let's go descending. This is going to throw an error, I think. I'm not sure, so I'm going to run it. Yeah, so we got to go, order by row ID descending, right? That might work. No. We actually have to put our limit at the end in this case. So from customers, order by row ID descending, limit 2. I think this will work now. Getting sloppy. So now we have 5 and 4, the last 2, right? Yeah. I should mention all of these things we're learning, you can usually just string along just by adding them to your executing statement here, right? So sometimes they have to be in specific order, like we just saw just now. Order by has to go first and then limit it at the end. If it doesn't work when you try something, try changing the order and it probably will. So, pretty simple. Limit 3. Limit however many you want. And very cool. So that's limit, just very simple. Not a whole lot to it, but I thought I would mention it just in case you ever need a limit. And yeah, so in the next video, I'll show you how to delete a table. Okay, so we've already looked at deleting a record. That's pretty straightforward. In this video, I want to show you how to delete an entire table. So like I said a couple videos ago when we talked about deleting, when you remove stuff from a table, you're dropping it from the table, from the database. Same thing with a table. You drop the table from the database, right? So to do that, we want to c.execute, right? And we're going to need to commit that. I'll just go ahead and put that right there. Now, inside of here, first you take a deep breath, and then you just type in drop table, and then the name of the table, customers, right? So if we save this, it will drop the table and then try and output everything from the table, which there shouldn't be anything in the table. So see how that goes. And we get an error, no such table, customers. So that tells us that the table has been dropped. It has been deleted. And like everything else, when you delete a thing, it's gone. That table is gone. It no longer exists. And that's it. So drop table, pretty simple. And yeah, that's how that works. So I'm going to rebuild the table after this video, and we're going to play around with this stuff some more and sort of build a very basic database app that we can use. And we'll start to look at that in the next video. Okay, in the last video, we deleted our table, we dropped it. I've gone ahead and recreated it. I put all the data back in exactly as it was so we can continue to use it. In this video, I want to start to build out a little app that takes sort of all the stuff we've learned up until now and sort of uses it. So at this point, we've learned all the basics for SQLite 3 with Python. And, we went through it really quickly, but there's not a whole lot to it. It's a very simple database to use, and it's one of the nice things about it. So from here on out, we're not going to do anything revolutionary. We're just going to build a simple app that sort of makes all the stuff we've done up until now a little easier, sort of splits it apart into a couple of different files so it's easier to read and should be a lot of fun. It'll help us reinforce the stuff we've already learned and I don't know, just be kind of fun. So I'm going to start right off the bat. I'm going to create a new file and let's save this as, I don't know, rapp.py. And the first thing we want to do is import database. And that's just this file right here that we've been working on throughout the whole course, database.py. We can import that into another file. So what we want to do here is take all of this stuff and build it into little functions, Python functions that we can then call from the other file. So we'll sort of abstract all the database stuff away and just make everything a lot cleaner. So I'm going to start out right here. Just going to push all this stuff down. Let's create a function and let's go define and let's call it show all, right? And what we want to do here is just show all the stuff in our database, right? In our table. So I'm going to take all of this stuff and I'm just going to paste it inside of this function. And paste. And same thing with this. And let's add these guys as well. Indenting is important for functions, so. Okay. And so we can get rid of that. Now, these two guys, I think we need to put these in each of our functions that we create. Okay. So I think that looks good, right? So let's create a comment and let's call query. Let's go query quest query the database and return all records. Right. So here we're connecting to the database, creating a cursor, executing a command to show all the stuff in there, putting it into this variable, and then looping through that variable and printing out each item onto the screen, and then closing, making our commit. In this case, we don't actually need to commit anything because we're just querying, we're not committing. So we'll probably take that out eventually. And then at the end, we want to close our connection. So if we save this and head back over here, now if we want to actually use that, we just call database dot show underscore all, like you would call any function. We need to put it in this database because the name of the file here is database dot show all, which is the name of that function right there. And we're not passing anything in because it doesn't require us to. All right, so if we save this, what do we call this? Our app.py. And if we head back over here, we can go Python our app.py. If we run it, boom, it prints out everything onto the screen. Very, very cool. Now, likewise, if we commented this out and saved this and ran it, again, nothing's going to happen. So there's nothing else going on in our app.py. So, and our database.py only has one function. Now we're going to spend the rest of the course building out more functions that we can then call, but that's a good way to get started, I think. And the next video, we'll go on and do the next thing. Okay, so we've created a function to show everything. Now let's create a function to add a record to our database. And so let's call this define, and let's call add one, right? And here, let's make a comment that says add a new record to the table, right? So we need to pass in the stuff that we want to add to the table. So we want first, let's call it last, and email, right? So we already know how to add stuff to our database. What we do is, well, first we need these two guys. We need to create a connection and a cursor. And since these are inside functions, you need to do it every time. Connect to the database and create cursor. Let's just get rid of this. There we go. Right. Next, we go c.execute, as we already know how to do. And we want to insert into, and our table is customers, and the values are, we want to put placeholders. We learned how to do that already. Right? Now, to add the variables that we pass, first, last, and email, we just put them right here, first, last, email. Okay, and then we need to commit this and close our connection. Right underneath there, boom, commit our command, close our connection. All right, that looks pretty good. So if we save this and head back over to our app, now to run this guy, we just call database.add1. Do we call it add1? Let's make sure here. Add1. Yep. Now we need to pass it three things: a first name, a last name, and an email. So let's go, oops, wrong one. Here, let's go, well, first name, last name, and email. We might go who? Give me a name here. Laura Smith. Laura at smith.com. Right? So this will run that. And then if we want to show it all, we'll keep this one here just to make sure. So let's go add a record to the database. Here, let's go show all the records. All right, so if we save this and run it, boom, we see Laura Smith, Laura at smith.com, has been added. Very cool, very easy, and that's all there is to it. In the next video, we will create a function to delete a record from our database. Okay, in the last video, we added a new record to the table. In this video, we want to create a function that deletes a record from the table, and this was a little bit trickier than you might expect, and I'll show you what I'm talking about in just a second. So let's head over here to our database.py file, and let's create a delete one function, and we want to pass in ID. Now inside of here, again, we're gonna make our connections here, and we want to close our connections here. And inside of here, we want to c.execute, right? And we know how to do this already. We want to delete from customers where, and we want to, let's do row ID equals, and here we want to put a placeholder, right? And then we want to pass in this ID, which is this ID, right? So that looks pretty good. Okay, so that'll work. But now head back over to our app to use this thing. We call database dot, what do we call this? Remove, delete one. Copy this, dot delete one. And now we want to pass in the number of the ID we want to delete. In this case, we want to delete 6. It's not up anymore, but 6 was the one we just added in the last video. Now, here's the weird thing. The IDs are numbers, right? Integers. We know they're integers. The database knows they're integers. So you would think we would pass an integer. But if we do, we save this and run it, we get an error. It says module database has no attribute, delete 1. Wait, that's the wrong error. Database delete 1. Did we not save? Let's pull this back up. Delete 1. Must not have saved it. All right, so now let's clear the screen, run this again. All right, this is the error I thought we would get. Value error, parameters are of unsupported type for this ID, right? We're passing a number, an integer. For some reason, we can't do that. We need to pass this 6 as a string. So let's go delete record, use row ID as string, right? So now if we save this in quotation marks, it'll pass this 6 over to here. ID becomes 6, a string that gets put into there that then somehow magically becomes a number again, and it should work. It's the weirdest thing. But if we run it, boom, now it works. 6 has been deleted. And just that simple. So that's how you delete stuff. In the next video, I think we already looked at how to add one record. Let's create one to add a bunch of records all at once, and we'll look at that in the next video. Okay, so in this video, we want to create a function to add many records to our table. We've already done one where we've add one record, so it makes sense that we would do for many. So let's go define add many, and let's pass in a list. We'll just call it list. And I'm just going to copy all of this stuff. So what we want to do is execute many and then insert into customers values, bop, 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 bop. But then here we want to pass in list, which is this guy right here, right? Does that look good? I think so. So let's save this and head back over here. And we don't want to delete anything. So here, let's go add many records. All right, so we want to call database dot add many, and we want to pass in our stuff. I don't know. So here we need to define stuff. We need to create a list, right? And inside of this, let's add 2 records, right? So here we want bump, 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 and I'm just going to copy this. And here, let's go Brenda Smitherton. I don't know. And she is Brenda at smitherton.com. And here we'll call Joshua Raintree. I don't know where I get these names. Josh at raintree.com. All right, so we're going to call add many, which is this guy. We're going to pass in stuff, which is all of this, right? So stuff, which is this list, becomes list. And then here we just pass that in. And since we have execute many, it should work, I think. Fingers crossed. Okay, and then at the end we'll show all. So, all right, let's see if this worked. Let's clear this screen. Boom. So we have Brenda Smitherton and Joshua Raintree, number 6 and number 7. And it worked. Just that easy. All right, so that was pretty cool. A little bit more complicated, but still not too bad. Now, we've sort of done all this stuff in this program here, which I think you would probably want to do, as opposed to adding it here somehow. That makes sense, right? Yeah. Okay. So that's all for this video. In the next video, we'll look at where, and yeah, I think that's about getting to the end of the stuff that we need to add into as functions. So yeah, look at that in the next video. Okay, so let's crank out one more of these functions. Let's look at the where clause. Now, to create a function to deal with where is kind of silly. I mean, there's just so many options. You could look up, pull all the records from a database where first name is X, or where last name is X, or where email address is X, or where, row ID is X, or, any of a zillion different permutations of that. So it doesn't really make a lot of sense to create a where function, but we're not really building a real app here. We're just sort of playing around with this to reinforce some of the concepts. So we might as well just knock one out. And let's just say we want to look up email addresses. It's pretty simple. So let's just call define email lookup. And we want to pass email, I guess. All right, so I'm just going to copy all of this, paste it in, and for our execute, what do we want to do? We want to select everything from customers, right? And we want where email equals, and we want to pass in email, right? Now this is a tuple. We're passing one thing, and so we put a little comma afterwards, just a little quirk, and sort of how that goes. Now we're not committing anything here. We're querying, and we want to put it up on the screen. So we need to come up here, and let's see, with a query, we need to fetch all, and let's loop through print those out. So I'm just going to copy that, and that looks good, I think. Yeah. Okay, so I think that looks good, right? Let's save this and head back over to our app and look up email address. So we want to call database.email lookup, and we want to pass something. So let's pass john@codemy.com. We know that's an address that exists in our system. So we can head back over here, run this again. Ooh, first of all, let's comment out this show all one. We don't need to show all, we just want to show the one that we're looking up. So save this, run it. Oh, data nace. Why didn't you tell me I misspelled that? Database. All right. Let's clear the screen and run this again, and boom, John Elder, john@codemy.com. If we want the ID as well, so we would go, we could add it like this, row ID and everything. Come back here, and now we get the row ID. So, you can do this for anything you want. If you want to create an email lookup one, you could do that. If you wanted to create a specific row ID, primary key ID lookup, you could do that. Like I said, this app we're building here, or we have built, I suppose, is, this is not supposed to be some professional app we're building. This is just a little toy thing that we can sort of play around with just to reinforce all of these different things. And it's kind of nice to have this, examples of how to, for instance, query, right there. How to add something to a table, right there. How to add many things to a table, right there. How to delete something from a table. It's just kind of nice to have them all in one file, and for reference going forward into the future, if you need to refer back to this, if you've built this with me, along with me, you'll have this to sort of reference back. So it's kind of cool. So I think that's all for this video. In the next video, we'll say a few more things and wrap this all up. Okay, so that's all for this video and for the course. If you liked it, be sure to smash the like button below, subscribe to the channel, give me a thumbs up for the YouTube algorithm, and check out my website, codemy.com, where you can use coupon code CAMP to get 65% off membership. So you pay just $27 to access all my courses, over 40 courses, hundreds of videos, and the PDFs of all my best-selling coding books. Join over 100,000 students learning to code just like you. My name is John Elder from codemy.com, and we'll see you in the next video.